La force d'une société, c'est les connexions créées au-delà des différences. Se connecter nous fait grandir en tant qu'individus et nous transforme en tant que collectivité. Ensemble, on est plus solide. C'est ce qu'on fait de mieux. C'est ce qui nous pousse à aller toujours plus loin. Car les connexions, c'est ce qui rend notre monde plus fort. On connecte, on accepte.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Violet Hour. Bienvenue au Violet Hour. My name is Christopher DiRaddo. Je m'appelle Chris DiRaddo. If this is your first time joining a Violet Hour, welcome. Usually these events are much different. They take place in a strip club in Montreal's Gay Village. So there would be a pole right here. You would have a room full of people. You would have books for sale at the back. You'd have a bar over here where you can get a drink. But unfortunately, we're going to have to kind of come to you digitally for this event. It's going to be a bit of a different pride this year, but I'm glad that you're tuning in. I think it's important for us to still get together as a community, even if it is online. So thank you so much for being a part of tonight's broadcast. We have 5 writers for you who will be reading for you tonight, 4 in English et un en français. Tonight we will be hearing from Rachel Matlow, Camilla Mackerel, Peter Dubé, Nicholas Dawson, and April Ford. All of them have recent books out that I'm going to encourage you to kind of check out, especially if you like their reading. But before we begin, I do want to take a moment to thank Fierté Montréal for including us in this year's programming. This is one of 3 events that they've agreed to co-present. Among them will be also a roundtable discussion with writers from Montreal's Metonymy Press called The New Face of Queer Lit, and also a one-on-one interview with Walt Cassidy, who is also known as Walt Paper, a former club kid from the 1990s. That event is a co-presentation with Never Apart. Even though this normally would have such a big social element to it, I do invite you to either comment, to reach out to the writers as well. Usually at this event you can kind of go up to them afterwards and say how much you like their work. You can buy their book, you can get it signed. You're not going to be able to do that this time, but I do encourage you to kind of reach out and learn more about them, each of them. Our first reader is Rachel Matlow. Rachel was a longtime producer on the arts and culture show Q on CBC Radio, where she also worked on Spark and the Sunday Edition. Her audio documentary Dead Mom Talking won a 2016 Third Coast Award and a 2017 Gabriel Award. She's also written for the Globe and Mail, National Post, and The Believer. Dead Mom Talking is her first book. Please welcome Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Matlow, the author of Dead Mom Walking, a memoir of miracle cures and other disasters. I was lying on a buffalo skin rug high on ayahuasca. My thoughts were going deep. Why can't she just get the damn surgery? How long will she keep this up for? What exactly did she mean by the quantum plane? I waited expectantly for access to a higher realm, and maybe some insight into my mom's magical thinking. Suddenly, my face felt wet. I opened my eyes. The shaman was standing over me, flicking Peruvian flower water on my head, chanting, sha-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Doing drugs was not my idea. I prefer to keep my visions 20/20. But what do you say when your 67-year-old mother asks you to go to the woods with her to take hallucinogens? To be clear, my mom was never the acid-dropping hippie type. She was more of a new age junkie, always on the lookout for a new fix. And now the stakes had never been higher. She'd been diagnosed with cancer and was trying every potion under the sun, except for chemo. As part of her alternative healing journey, Mom had decided to attend an overnight ayahuasca ceremony in the countryside, an hour north of Toronto. The psychoactive plant remedy, used by indigenous peoples in the Amazon for centuries, had become all the rage among Western spiritual seekers. Made from the vine and leaves of 2 separate plants and consumed as a molasses-like tea, ayahuasca's effects are said to be cleansing and transformative. It's been used to help people overcome depression, anxiety, addiction, and many other conditions. People say it's like 30 years of psychotherapy in one night, Mom boasted. That's supposed to sound appealing? Unsure of what to expect, Mom had asked me to come along. It'd be nice to have you there for support, she'd said, and maybe you'll have your own spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening? My spirit likes to hit the snooze button and hates leaving downtown. But I love my mom, and if she was going to experiment with drugs, I'd rather be there to keep an eye on her. At the very least, it would be a mother-daughter trip to remember, if only in flashbacks. We arrived at a log house where the shaman greeted us with the kind of deep, meaningful hugs that last way too long. He was a very friendly white guy in his mid-50s who introduced himself by his Peruvian medicine man name. I imagine his real name was something like Jerry Goldstein. Mom and I said hello to a few other participants who were already huddled around in the living room. We found some floor space on the rug and rolled out our sleeping bags so that our feet faced the fireplace-turned altar, adorned with feathers, crystals, and antlers. Then, to my horror, the shaman proceeded to hand out large empty yogurt containers because, as he explained, it's common to purge when you take the medicine. Apparently, I was the only one not aware of this fun fact. But it was too late. The psychedelic slumber party had begun. The shaman blessed the ayahuasca, and one by one, we are invited to sit at the altar and do a shot. When it was my turn, I gulped back the bitter brew and headed back to my cocoon, where I chased it down with some orange vitamin water. With notes of rancid coffee, rusted metal, and jungle rot, it wasn't a mystery why they called ayahuasca the vine of death. Now, going into this, I thought the shaman would just be on hand, like if I had any questions or wasn't feeling well. But no, this ceremony was intimate and interactive. As we started our trips, he began making his rounds, each time with a different act. First, he waved a fan made of feathers in my face. Next, he shook dried leaves around my body. Then he blew tobacco smoke into my sleeping bag. Thanks? By the time I was being baptized with flower water, I figured things couldn't get any worse. Then, my stomach began to rumble. I absolutely hate throwing up, so I was determined to keep the poison down, even as my tummy churned like a washing machine. However, I discovered that if there's one thing I hate more than throwing up, it's hearing a room full of people, including my own mother, violently puking their guts out into yogurt containers. It was a sober vision of pure hell. By about 4 a.m., the hope of sleep putting me out of my misery was all but lost. "It's music time," someone announced. I braced myself as a long-haired hippie dude picked up a guitar and began to serenade us. "Free, free, like a dolphin in the sea," he sang repeatedly. He obviously hadn't seen The Cove. If ayahuasca was bringing any clarity to my life, it was that saving Mom would have to wait for another day, and that I should never leave home without earplugs. I glanced over at her. She was all adorable, all strung out, swaddled in her sleeping bag. Is this how she used to look at me when I was a baby? I was feeling restless. I wondered if it would be rude if I excused myself to go watch TV in the bedroom. Maybe I could play Scrabble on my phone. There was really no way out, so I went back to the altar and downed another shot. Happy Pride!
Thank you so much, Rachel. Our next author is Peter Dubé. Peter is the author, co-author, or editor of 11 books, including the novels Hovering World and The City's Gates, the short fiction collections At the Bottom of the Sky and Beginning with the Mirror, the novella Subtle Bodies, which was a finalist for the Shirley Jackson Award, and Conjure, a book of spells, a collection of prose poems that was shortlisted for the A.M. Klein Prize. His most recent book from which he'll be reading is The Headless Man, a novel in prose poems.
All right, first I'd like to say thank you to Chris for inviting me, and thank you to all of those who are watching tonight. I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to be reading from my new book, The Headless Man. And in this book, what I do is I take Georges Bataille's figure of the Asafal and turn him into a character in order to think about ideas of difference and things of that nature. So I'll just read a couple of pieces for you. This one is called The Headless Man Goes to the Movies. He knows that he enters the darkness, even as the darkness enters him. Of this the headless man is certain. A door shuts athwart dazzle across sound. The temperature of a body climbs without notice, anticipated and welcome. The headless man finds a seat and waits, observing the negotiations of light and the absence of light, curious about the method, the modalities by which this conjures meaning. The blackness parts at his curiosity and yields a limitless parade. Oceans of grey and shattered hearts, all yielded to the violence of the wind, that colossal indifference to us. Architecture is toppled, and in the toppling freed. Storm. The order and the honor of generations are waved and twirled. Everything is silver, silvered, compromised in visionary intensity. And yet, the headless man knows this passage being the nature of things. Fingers fluttering in the dark, colors arises. Pewter turns to peach, to hues of pink. The gloom of ancestors to a crude but comfortable blue. Brown bleeds from charcoal, reds from the tones of ash. Pyres and furnaces rendering memory. Alone in the vast gloom and without eyes, he sees wonders. Bereft of ears, his guts resound with new musics, sounds that beggar belief. The headless man raises his hands and lowers his center of gravity to embrace the unknown till now. In the newly colored world, it begins. Green, all of it green, overpowering green and glitter. A city made of precious stones refuses to throw open its gates. Angry beasts that should not fly take wing. Heartlessness and ignorance flee from their homes. Nomads and deserts haunt those rearview mirrors. There's no place like it. The set of lands, the fruitless promise of the optical. Shut down the four directions, thinks the headless man. Abolish them. Open it all. There's much more to the world than this. His hands and his stomach are joined. Sound and noise and sense in contact once for once. How he understands. The headless man knows a civilization in the hot pursuit of its best shadow. This is it. Letting the darkness out. He waits for the lights. So that's the going to the movies. And I think the other thing I'd like to read for y'all is maybe just one more piece, is The Headless Man Gets Head. It starts in the hands, in the unfurling and clenching of the fingers as they close on another man's. The headless man sees it all. The fullness of the lips, the clatter of the nerves spitting images into the remote cerebral arena. There they mutate into timelessness. The amassing of treasures, the evocation of hungry spirits, the emptying of city squares, the tides, the southward flight of birds, the descent into darkness. The stranger's hand held as they walk down the stairs into gathering gloom. Each step takes them deeper, and their contract grows, mastering the staircase and avoiding the fall, knowing the touch of a man, returning it. The headless man at last finds an empty space. At the bottom of the stairs, a cubical midnight reaches out for them, takes them in its arms. They move through a body of sound. The moanings and moist susurrations of flesh stir together, the slippery hiss of sliding mouths, the odd slap shattering any recall of a pat world they'd embraced and in which desiring men are animated shadows. They pass through a curtain of chains to enter a deep obscurity and head for its furthest point. Here, the sounds are almost constant, though more muffled. The flesh erupting, the surge into proximity, the vanishing, the body glow unveiled, and veiled again, the body glow erect in an empty space. The headless man and his partner find a deep place all their own, and their hands part only for the other man's hand to find his acephalous partner's waist as he falls to his knees in perfect, impenetrable silence. The headless man would, if he could, gasp. Would, if he could, cry out as his body, beginning at the groin, stiffens and becomes all tension. Bone and cartilage, muscle and sinew blood vessels, fluids, nerves, even the ceaseless, accelerating heartbeat becomes a kind of structure. A birdcage holding a brilliantly colored, fluttering impulse prisoner, though temporarily. The winged thing batters at the limits of the body, struggling, yearning, running riot, finding flight in the dark. The headless man grabs the hands on his hips, squeezes them, moves them to his kneeling lover's head, and rests them there, first riding the relentless back and forth, and soon encouraging it. He cannot yet know this word. The darkness takes them both and everything else, until there is no need for hands any longer, no need for sound. In a blast of light so short-lived as to be all but imperceptible, the lover's mouth presses up against him. The lover rushes forward to see it. His arms go round the headless man, whose spine shoots skyward suddenly, and none of it endures. At the fulgurant moment, the stars vanish. The other men, too. The curtain of chains evaporates. The kneeling man diffuses, and the headless man is gone. The body's cage dissolves, and the riotous, fluttering bird, gone free at last, begins to sing. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Love the bookshelves. Notre prochain lecteur est Nicholas Dawson. Né au Chili, Nicholas détient une maîtrise en études littéraires et complétait une thèse de doctorat en études et pratiques des arts à l'Université du Québec à Montréal. Il est l'auteur du recueil de poésie La déposition des chemins, du roman Animatas et de l'essai de recherche-création Désormais ma demeure. En plus d'avoir publié plusieurs textes et photographies en ligne, en revue et dans des ouvrages collectifs, il est également membre du comité de rédaction de la revue Mobius et le directeur littéraire de la collection Poèmes aux éditions Triptyque. Please welcome Nicholas.
Allô, je m'appelle Nicholas Dawson. Je vais vous lire un extrait de mon livre Désormais ma demeure, qui a été publié cette année aux éditions Triptyque à la collection Queer. Donc, le titre de la partie s'appelle Sortir de la maison, psychologue. Dans mon souvenir, je marche peu pour rendre visite à ce nouveau psychologue dans son bureau qui se trouve en réalité dans son appartement rue Wolfe, à 2 pas du cabaret Mado, fermé à 7 heures matinales. Je passe par là et je pense aux drag queens qui s'y trouvent le soir et aux jeunes à leur côté comme des petits poissons auprès des requins, à ces bandes de jeunes garçons auxquels je n'ai jamais appartenu, ces garçons qui rient avec les drag queens, qui crient avec les drag queens, qui se filment avec les drag queens et font des selfies, se moquent des plus faibles et adulent les plus forts. Désormais, je me dis, le cabaret Mado. Je ne finis pas ma phrase, mais l'effet est le même. Ce lieu, désormais, ne porte plus les couleurs de la fête. Dans mon souvenir, la fenêtre laisse passer trop peu de lumière pour éclairer suffisamment l'espace. Je devine les contours, les murs bruns, des meubles anciens. Je vois surtout de la fumée de cigarettes flotter parmi les rayons. Je pense, ça sent le fond de tonne. Et j'entends aussitôt une voix nasillarde m'appeler, comme si j'étais un enfant ou un chien. « Viens, viens, au fond de l'appartement, ouvre les portes devant toi, je suis dans le bureau, après le salon, après la cuisine. Ouvre les portes jusqu'au fond, viens. » J'ouvre une porte qui donne sur le balcon et un tissu me frôle le bras. Un tissu lourd et scintillant, une robe accrochée au mur, une robe d'été, noire et mauve, couverte de paillettes, une fourrure synthétique tout au long du décolleté. Je pense, une robe de drag queen. Et je trébuche contre les plumes d'un boa. Dans mon souvenir, une autre porte, moins lourde, plus mince, s'ouvre sur une cuisine remplie de bouteilles de bière vides, puis encore une autre porte sur une pièce chargée de draps colorés aux motifs divers. Au mur de ce bureau sont affichés des morceaux de tapis et de tissus, des colliers et des photos de célébrités, Céline Dion, Dalida, Edith Piaf, Marilyn Monroe, Barbara, Michel Richard. Dans mon souvenir, un énorme chat se repose sur le fauteuil qui m'est destiné. Pousse-toi, chagrin, laisse la visite s'asseoir. Tu peux le prendre, il est paresseux, mais il est gentil. Je pousse le chat du dos de la main. Je pense à mes allergies qui commenceront bientôt à me faire souffrir. Et je m'assieds sur les poils laissés par chagrin, devant le psy qui me reluque, qui me sourit, avec cet air que je rencontre parfois quand je marche près de chez Mado, quand j'y croise des hommes âgés qui me regardent de haut en bas, avec cette grimace comme une invitation qu'il n'arrive pas à verbaliser, peut-être par crainte du refus, du rejet, du scandale qu'il pourrait créer. Peut-être que ce regard et ce sourire sont en réalité plus proches d'une imploration, tentent de dire en sourdine « Je t'en supplie, dis-moi que tu veux de moi ». Et peut-être que ces hommes ne savent plus où donner de la tête, parmi les bandes de jeunes garçons qui traînent avec les drag queens comme des petits poissons auprès des requins. Peut-être qu'ils ne savent plus ce qu'ils ont le droit de dire, ce qu'ils peuvent regarder, s'ils peuvent vraiment tenter leur chance pour une nuit d'amour au risque d'un rejet supplémentaire qui, malgré sa quotidienneté, ne cessera jamais d'être douloureux. Je me dis alors que ce psy qui me reluque, qui me regarde comme si j'étais un de ces garçons du quartier, il est peut-être l'un d'eux, jadis jeune et populaire, aujourd'hui vieux et silencieux, et que tout ce qui se trouve ici, la robe, le boa, les bières, chagrin qui se frottent contre ma jambe, et le clin d'œil éternel de Michel Richard. Ce sont des vestiges d'un temps révolu où l'amour se faisait, où les nuits étaient chaudes. Et je pense notre milieu est cruel. Et mon regard s'adoucit malgré ce ton lubrique qu'il utilise quand il dit « Alors, dis-moi ce qui va pas ». Dans mon souvenir, il parle lentement, il roule les airs et il étire les premiers mots de ses phrases pour les rendre plus mielleuses. Quelque chose me dégoûte dans sa voix, dans son débit, dans la façon dont il place les lèvres comme un élan pour parler, dans le plissement de ses yeux pour mieux me faire comprendre qu'il essaie de voir au-delà de moi, dans ses caresses fugaces sur les petites cartes qu'il tient entre ses mains déposées contre ses jambes croisées, dans le mouvement circulaire qu'il effectue avec son pied au-dessus du tapis, dans le ronronnement de chagrin. Je dis, je suis allergique au chat, est-ce qu'on peut le sortir de la pièce? Dans mon souvenir, il couvre chagrin de baisers avant de le chasser. Il l'appelle mon gros matou, ou mon gros minou, ou mon gros toutou, peu importe, il le dit avec un ton indécent. Je détourne le regard, mais mes yeux se posent à nouveau sur Michel Richard. Il dit « Je vais prendre des notes sur mes petites cartes et je vais te les remettre à la fin avec des phrases encourageantes pour les moments difficiles. » Ces mots sont prononcés sur le même ton qu'il a employé pour dire « mon gros matou, mon gros minou, mon gros toutou ». Puis, sur le même ton, il dit « Alors, mon cher, dis-moi, dis-moi ». Dans mon souvenir, la séance se déroule sans événement majeur. Il ne change jamais de regard pendant que je raconte mon histoire. Il ne desserre jamais les lèvres. Il ne cesse jamais de me reluquer, de poser furtivement les yeux sur mon torse, mes mains, mes pieds, ma jambe, là où plus tôt chagrin se frottait. Par moments, il écrit quelques mots sur une carte qu'il place ensuite lentement entre ses jambes, m'interrompt parfois pour en lire le contenu. J'entends ma colère, mais est-ce que je l'écoute? Pleurer sa rage et rager sa colère. Dans mon souvenir, je ne réponds pas. Je ne comprends pas le sens de ces phrases. Je ne sais pas ce que cela signifie, rager sa colère, pleurer sa rage. Je change de sujet. Je parle de mes origines chiliennes. Je parle de l'exil. Il n'écrit rien sur sa carte, mais affiche un sourire éclatant. Il dit « Hablas espagnol ?» Je réponds « Oui, je parle espagnol. » Il répond encore. Il dit « Yo también un poquito ?» Je ne réponds pas, je pense à ces hommes qui me reluquent près de chez Mado à cause de la couleur de ma peau, qui m'invitent parfois chez eux dans un horrible espagnol, et auquel je ne sais jamais quoi répondre parce que je suis pris au dépourvu devant tant de solitude et de désespoir, devant tant de maladresse et d'ignorance, devant tant de désir et d'abandon, devant tant de candeur et d'aplomb. Je suis bouche bée, je veux encore changer de sujet, mais je suis à court d'anecdotes. Déjà, je suis au bout de mon récit, je voudrais plutôt connaître le sien. Dans mon souvenir, il parle de la République dominicaine, de la musique caribéenne et des jeunes latinos qui savent bouger. Il me demande si je suis homosexuel, si j'ai un amoureux, si mon amoureux est latino. Je dis non, il est blanc. Il ne réagit pas, il dit que je devrais aller dans le sud, au soleil, en République dominicaine ou ailleurs, dans les Caraïbes. Je commence à m'amuser, je dis « À Cuba? » Il dit « Pourquoi pas? Oui, Cuba. » Je dis « En Haïti? » Il hésite. Je sais pas, c'est un peu triste Haïti, non? Je dis « C'est dans les Caraïbes. » Il dit « Oui, c'est vrai, mais... » Il s'interrompt pour écrire sur une petite carte qu'il place entre ses jambes. La République dominicaine, là-bas, c'est du monde heureux, du monde... comment on dit? Du monde Félix? Du monde Félix. Buena gente. Il ne sait pas prononcer le G, le G. Je le corrige avec le maximum d'arrogance dont je suis capable, avec toute la furie que je trouve au fond de moi-même. Cette furie que je puise à même les formes contemporaines de colonialisme. Gente. On dit gente, gente. Je pense, c'est peut-être ça, rager sa colère. Je pense, faudrait que je pleure maintenant. Dans mon souvenir, il me remet les petites cartes en grande cérémonie. Tu es un homme intelligent, tu es un bel homme, tu te connais bien, tu n'as pas besoin de moi. Lis ces petites cartes quand ça va pas, tu vas être correct. Mais ma porte est ouverte, quand tu veux, je suis là pour toi. Il répète, je suis là pour toi. Son empathie si simple, inappropriée, trop intime, réussit néanmoins à m'émouvoir. Dans mon souvenir, sur la dernière carte, un petit soleil, à côté de 2 mots simples. République dominicaine. Merci.
Merci, Nicolas. April Ford is a Montreal-based LGBTQ+ writer and the Quebec regional representative for the Writers' Union of Canada. Her short stories, poems, and essays have been published in Canada, the US, Mexico, Germany, Scotland, and Spain. Her short story, Project Fumares, is featured in the Pushcart Prize XL Anthology. April helps at-risk youth express themselves through writing and is pursuing a degree in social work at the Université of Montreal. Welcome, April.
Hi, my name is April Ford, and I am so happy to be reading with the Violet Hour and Fierté Montréal. I'll be sharing a little bit of my debut novel with you, Carousel, which, in spite of the pandemic, made it into the world this May, thanks to my amazing publisher, Inanna Publications. Thank you, guys. The excerpt I'll be sharing takes place in La Ronde, and the narrator, Margot, a 45-year-old recently retired antique firearms dealer, is visiting the park for only the second time. She's experiencing some uncertainties about her marriage, and just the day before, her first time at the park, met a young lady who operates one of the rides, and this has drawn her back. "Can I ask you something?" Katie said. "You may," I said. "Why do you talk like that, Margot?" "Like what?" Katie chewed her bottom lip and dug the toe of her sneaker into the ground. Well, it's like you're always reading from an instruction manual or something." "There's nothing wrong with instruction manuals," I said. "When I was in Boston this spring, seeing my cousin, I rode the T, and you remind me of the conductor. Next stop, Longwood. This train is heading to Government Center." That's a recording, Katie. The line moved forward as the next round of people boarded the Vampire. We had been waiting our turn for over an hour. I counted the number of heads in front of us, looked back at the ones bobbing impatiently behind us, and realized it was too late to turn back unless I was prepared to pry through a mass of sweaty bodies and duck under the metal divider railings. "When we get to the platform," I said, "I'm going to bypass the ride and wait for you on the other side." "I'm sorry, Margot. I didn't mean it as an insult. Please don't make me go on alone. I always go alone, and I hate it." "I'm not making you do anything, Katie. Do as you wish when your turn comes." Katie spun toward me and grabbed my hands. "Ryan never wants to do fun things with me. He says he will, but he comes home after work and all he wants to do is watch football or meet his friends at Town Tavern in Lore. He always says I can come with him, but his friends never talk to me, and I am sure the lady who works behind the bar has a thing for him. She's got red hair." "Then you tell her to back off. And who's Brian?" "My fiancé." "How old are you, Katie?" 18. Almost. That's why he's my fiancé. We're getting married right after my birthday. Right after I leave here. He promised." She smiled broadly and flashed her engagement ring. The thread-thin silver band that dipped into the approximate shape of a heart stirred in me a compassion that both startled and embarrassed me. The Vampire came twisting around the platform, its passengers red-faced and electric-socket-haired. A quartet of girls in the last train was still screaming and waving their arms in the air like fools after the ride had thundered to a stop. "We're up," Katie said, so evidently braced for disappointment I couldn't say no, even though I felt certain I would lose my fries at some early point in the ride. "Just this once," I said, moving forward with the crowd, which had become solemn as it approached the queen bee of roller coasters. "You should know I'm just as boring as Ryan." Katie, I gathered, would want to sit either at the extreme front or the extreme rear, but there was no way this would happen on my watch. After a swarm of pimply teenagers proclaimed ownership of the prime spots, greedily straddling the sticky-looking ski-lift-style chairs, we stepped onto the platform and I tugged Katie by her shirt hem to the middle of the train. "Aw," she mock-whined, claiming the chair to my right so I wouldn't have to sit beside strangers. Katie was silent until the ride operators lowered our chest restraints and locked us in place. "So," she said, "when the Vampire gets going, are you going to read from your instruction manual on how to scream?" The cheeky brat. I turned to scold her, but the padded vinyl head stabilizer was so snug that I boxed my ear, which meant that once the ride began shooting and dipping and twirling around the candy yellow track, I was sure to suffer worse damage. It only hurts a bit, Katie laughed, her sunburnt face seeming to catch fire from her excitement. As in 2 Tylenols and a nap will solve the problem, or as in a trip to the ER and some stitches? You take naps? And then we were off. As with the other trains I had watched, ours instantly turned into a megaphone for repressed screams. Even during the vampire's slow ascent to the cliff of the first steep drop, people decompressed faster than helium balloons and let out some terrible sounds. A foursome of grown men in the train in front of ours roared like lions and rattled their restraints. Thankfully, Katie didn't seem prone to excess and instead curled her hands around the padded head stabilizer. "Like this, Margot," she said. "Keep your neck relaxed and you'll be fine." Down the first drop we snaked, building speed as we next flipped upside down and soared around the first of 5 loops. Katie lost her composure as we neared the second loop, and I was certain I was about to lose my lunch. People yelled, people laughed, some even wept, and then once again we were ripped from the comforts of being upright on the track, and I clutched my stomach, thus making my poor ears vulnerable to repeated pummeling. "I'm going to be sick," I shouted. "What?" I said, "I'm going to be sick." "You're what?" "I need to get off this ride immediately." And then as quickly as the nightmare had started, it jerked to a halt and the vampire pulled up to the platform. Quite possibly the only reason I didn't vomit was my highly tuned sense of dignity. Had the ride continued for a moment longer, I would have lost my hold, but as soon as my brain recognized that it was no longer being assailed by vertigo, I was able to preserve myself through deep breathing and a slow dismount from the ski lift chair. Katie was abuzz from the experience and darted off without a word. I wondered if she was going to be sick. A ride operator came to ask if I required assistance. "Thank you, kind sir, but I'm fine. A little rattled, but fine." I waited for him to comment on the girl who had been with me and who was now nowhere to be seen, and I indulged briefly in imagining how I would respond if he mistook her for my daughter. I wanted him to mistake Katie for my daughter, and I wanted to neither correct nor confirm him, but to appear like a person who was connected to other people. Without referring to myself as Estelle's wife, as Bertrand's business partner, what did I have left? The operator waited dutifully while I dismounted and experienced the first of many muscle spasms to come that day, but his attention was stitched to the white and blue faded short shorts of teenage girls bending over the pile of messenger bags and purses they had left behind for the ride. To me, they were all the same, unshapely, downy legs spilled into grown-up garments, but to a man whose continuous duty was to buckle people in and then unbuckle them 5 minutes later, this must have been the highlight of his job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, April. Our final reader for the evening is Kama Le Mackerel. Kama is a Montreal-based Mauritian-Canadian multidisciplinary artist, educator, writer, community arts facilitator, and literary translator who works within and across performance, photography, installations, textiles, digital art, and literature. Kama's work is grounded in the exploration of justice, love, healing, decoloniality, hybridity, cosmopolitanism, and self and collective empowerment. They believe that aesthetic practices have the power to build resilience and act as resistance to the status quo, thereby enacting an anti-colonial practice through cultural production. Kama has exhibited and performed their work internationally, and their writing in English, French, and Creole has appeared in publications both online and in print. They have lived in far-flung places such as Pune, India, and Peterborough, Ontario. Zum Fam, their debut poetry collection, is forthcoming from Autonomy Press. Kama will read from the collection. Welcome, Kama.
Hi, my name is Kama Le Mackerel. Thank you for having me today as part of the Violet Hour for Fierté Montréal. I'm super excited this today. I'm going to be reading some excerpts from my debut poetry collection, Zum Fam. As of now, as I'm reading this, the book is not out yet, but it's going to be out in all bookstores September 10th, 2020. So Zum Fam is comprised of 8 expansive lyric poems. Basically, it tiptoes between being long-form poetry and almost short stories. And Zum Fam in Mauritian Creole means man, woman, or transgender as one term. And it's a book about growing up as a queer child on a plantation island in Mauritius, where I come from. So I'm going to be reading a little bit from that for you. I will first read a piece, Muffin, which is actually the opening piece from the book. Pan la dire qui motine, Enzo qui ti muffin, Enzo qui ti soinet. The story goes that I was born on a day that was muffin. On that hot midsummer day, the southeast wind stopped blowing. The sun's burn stagnated high over the smothered flesh of the island. Heat rose from the ocean in sheets of vapor, distorting the island into dreamlike landscapes. On that day, the moon was plump and orange, high above the line of the horizon, mirroring the sun against the skin of the sky. Geckos gathered on top of banana trees, licked their glazed bulb eyes, clicked their rhythmic tongues, the brittle whistle of their mating dance, and echo swaddled like a shawl over the bosom of the island. Tides churned. Fishermen stayed ashore, drinking arak under philao trees, watching the disquiet of the sea with blood and dread in their eyes. It was Zone Muffin. Everybody felt the ripple of agitation in their heart, prayed away the ill-omened day with bread, salt, and water. Grandimun, the elders, said it was the retelling of an old sentiment. Island bodies are haunted by the longings of spirits lost in the Kala Pani, and because we are severed from the sacred river, we have forgotten the songs to soothe the torment of the ancestors. So on days like these, Zone Muffin, when they sail to us from the mud of the ocean, our bodies bruise and brood. My mother, a nurse, in the 10th lunar cycle of her pregnancy, working her day shift at the hospital, felt her ribcage outstretched like mangrove roots into the swelled waters of her belly. She heard the voice of her dead mother, thin like smoke in her right ear, and she knew the time has come. She breathed deeply, asked Durgama and Lavieznor to protect her, and filled the paperwork to admit herself into hospital. An hour later, I breathed my first breath. The great-grand-aunt, who was the oldest member of the family, was immediately brought in to see me. A full set of hair, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 arms, 2 feet, a small flat nose, a belly button, and a penis. E pare Enzo li baba se mogete ki zou linne, Enzo muffin, ki you pou faire si so coco piqué. Anche Swami, demande ki pou faire pour les enfants là. So this is an excerpt from the opening piece. The opening piece in the book starts with the story of my birth. Of course, and I will read another excerpt from you, which is more towards the end of the book. So this is the part about Kum Kum. One of the things that I do in this book is that I try to reinvent basically queer and trans ancestries, decolonial queer and trans ancestries in terms of how they could exist based on my own history and my culture. So it's a kind of like reclamation of the past. So there's this persona whom I create in this book called Kum Kum. So I'll introduce you to Kum Kum. I dream of Kum Kum with round shoulders, a blood-red bindi on her forehead, a glint of gall hanging over the edge of her pointed nose, raven curly hair, a tad too greasy but that still bounces up and down the nape of her neck as she walks in the morning sun. Kum Kum wears plain cotton kurtas that she haggles in the markets of Plainvert, and if she ever gets invited to a wedding, she adorns herself of her most prized garment, a brocaded red salwar camise that wraps her rotten body like the heavy skin of syrupy lychee. Kum eats rice, dal and pickles during the week, and on weekends she treats herself to some dried salted fish cooked with onions, fresh thymes and tomatoes, and bon petit rogaille poisson salé bien mauricien. Kum has a radio set. She listens to the news and FIDO every morning, and Hindi songs every evening. Kum rubs coconut oil in her thick black hair every Friday. Kum has a job. She works in the tobacco factory in the capital city with all the poor women whose husbands had died in obscure wars nobody on the island really knows about. They fought in a faraway British war and they never came back. On her lunch break, Kum does not step out with the other women to roll tobacco in small newspaper pieces that burn their darkened lips. Instead, she stays at her workstation. She sits silently and she prays. She prays to Goddess Durgama. She prays for protection. She prays for a good life. She prays for forgiveness. She prays for love. When it gets hot in the capital city, Kum takes out a white embroidered handkerchief from her purse and wipes the purse of sweat from her forehead. Kum likes flower patterns. Kum loves embroidery. On Sundays, Kum polishes her floor et can brosse coco. She brings out her mattress, leans it in the sun against the mango tree and beats it with a stick. She winnows her rice and lentils for the week. She makes fruit pickles that she dries on her roof, and at the end of the day, she massages her feet with a slick of warm coconut oil. This is Kum. She draws her life like a moving sculpture, a figure ever so ephemeral, becoming and unbecoming herself with every single one of my dreams. So those were a couple of excerpts from Zombie Femme, my debut poetry collection, which is coming out from Metonymic Press, September 10th, 2020. Thank you for joining us for this reading. I hope you enjoy this.
Thanks, Kama. So there we have it, the first ever digital edition of the Violet Hour. I'd like to thank you for being here with me. I hope you enjoyed yourself as much as I did. I'd encourage you to check out more about these authors and also to purchase their books. We partner with the Paragraph bookstore in Montreal here for the Violet Hour, so I encourage you to support them. They actually have the English language books available at a 15% discount. You can contact them through their website, and they offer curbside pickup as well as home delivery. Concernant le livre de Nicholas Dawson, je vous invite à contacter notre libraire féministe L'Aiguillonne située dans le village. A couple other thank yous. I want to thank Fierté Montréal for their support of this event, and also to my good friend Craig Tarian for helping to put together the video. I wish you all the best. Happy Pride, and keep reading. Support local writers, support Canadian writers, support Montreal writers. It really does mean a lot. Happy Pride. Take care. Bye.
La force d'une société, c'est les connexions créées au-delà des différences. Se connecter nous fait grandir en tant qu'individus et nous transforme en tant que collectivité. Ensemble, on est plus solide. C'est ce qu'on fait de mieux. C'est ce qui nous pousse à aller toujours plus loin. Car les connexions, c'est ce qui rend notre monde plus fort. On connecte, on accepte.